All right. So moving right along, got a relatively easy day today with regards to what we're going to go over. We only have a few sections left for our only have a few sections left for our systematic review, so that's good. And the next section we're going to do is the discussion. So like I talked about a little bit last time, the discussion is going to be your time to put the information you found during your systematic review into context. There are 3 sections within the discussion. The first section is your summary of evidence. This is where now, opposed to just doing what you did earlier, where you tried to decrease the amount of words that you use to describe the evidence, now you can expand more and interpret what that means. So opposed to just saying that there was a difference, there wasn't a difference, you can now start to analyze that and see, all right, is there something different about, well, first off, is our information homogeneous or heterogeneous with, do we have a consistent answer? If we don't have a consistent answer, what might be causing the differences? You know, like, oh, maybe this technique does work, but this technique doesn't work. Or maybe you need to do it for 10 minutes because 5 minutes isn't long enough. Maybe if you measure, maybe if you measure the outcome one way, it shows differences and doesn't the other. And why might that be? This is where you can bring in additional resources. You can bring in additional sources, anything you want to kind of explain what you found. So think back to when you first started this project and you wanted to know what the answer was and why. In this first section, specifically address more of the why portions. You know, why there might be differences, why there might not have been differences, why some studies found positive and some found negative results, any sorts of things with that. Again, try to avoid one paragraph, one source type structures. However, that is more acceptable in this section. It may be that one study warrants enough attention to get its own paragraph. In this first section, you have probably 2 to 3 paragraphs at most. If you get to 4 in this first section, it may start to get long. The second section then is your limitations. This really is going to discuss anything you wish was different. So some of those could be, gosh, there just were not a lot of articles. And I wish there was more articles. This could be, gosh, I really wish somebody would have, evaluated strength in this way. Right? So each one of those wishes becomes a limitation. And by limitation, you're just going to state, this study was limited by the fact that there was a decreased number of, or there was a limited number of research articles available specifically in analyzing X or Y or Z. This could be, a matter of 2 or 3 sentences, or could be up to 2 paragraphs. It's two, excuse me. It's 2 to 3 sentences if all you have to do is provide now some context for your own recommendations. So if you were able to basically answer your question, but it was limited based off of, a few more minor things, maybe it was, only done in lab settings opposed to, more field-based settings, something like that. These are just things that you're going to add to kind of create the context for your conclusions, which are next. Basically warnings to your reader, hey, I'm going to make some conclusions here in a second. However, if you are specifically looking for X, Y, or Z, this may not, apply to you. It can go up to 2 paragraphs if you had that statement back at the beginning that described the fact that you had to broaden your search because there was no research available regarding your specific question. So if we go back and we look at, our original PICO question, and our question specifically was looking at college athletes. And there was no research or very, very limited amount of research on college athletes. So we said that we would broaden it to include active individuals. Right, so we broadened it to include active individuals. At this point in your limitations would be where you would go back to that and describe how this can be applied back to your original PICO question. Right? So it may be that you weren't able to get college athletes, but you were able to get some very high quality recreational athletes. And so the statement would be relatively short, saying that there was, there were no studies on college athletes. However, there were recreationally active athletes that were very similar in their training and demographics. And so it's reasonable to assume that the results would be similar in collegiate athletes. Or it could be much more complicated. Let's say that you're really interested in decreasing injury rates, but you weren't able to find any research specifically on injury rates. So instead, you had to broaden it to differences in strength and range of motion, right? This would then be where you would describe the relationship between strength and range of motion and injury, because there is research that describes, for different body parts, how strength and range of motion can be predictors of injury. So it's kind of the, the A plus B equals C sort of argument. This is where you can add that B. So if A causes B and B causes C, then we can assume through B, A causes C, sort of stuff. Does that make sense? So that can be in your limitation section as well. The last section really is 2 parts in one short paragraph. It is your conclusions and your implications for future research. So it goes something like this. The answer to my question is blank, and therefore further research should look at blank. All right, it's formatted nicer than that and all that, but that's basically what you're doing. You're going to give the specific answers to your questions. What are the most important things? If you read only one thing from this, what do you want them to get? That's your conclusions. And then the last part is what then needs to happen next. So now that we know this, what would be the next step in figuring out our bigger problem that we started with in a more thorough way? Sometimes the recommendations for future research are just to address the limitations, because the limitations are at a point where we have difficulty coming to a strict conclusion. Other times, we now know that either A causes B or A doesn't cause B. So therefore, we need to go the next step and say, okay, does A in fact cause C? Or is there a different B, is now D caused by A? Or something like that that would address this project or this problem. So for example, going back to Rudy's example, right, a recommendation for future research. Let's assume that in football players, maximum speed training causes increased peak velocity, right? We assume that, right? I don't know whether it does or not. That's going to be the purpose of the rest of his stuff, right? But if we know that, Rudy really wasn't that interested in peak velocity. I mean, it's kind of cool when they do the, like next gen stats or whatever. But what we're more interested in then, so recommendation for future research would be something like, does introducing a peak speed, right, lead to better football performance, right, as measured by, for running backs, increased yards, per carry, blah, 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 blah. Is there a correlation to that? Right, that would be the next step. That's really what we were more interested in, but we can't get there right away until we knew what we had. Yep, the recommendations the conclusion has, your main statements and recommendations for future research. And should be a very short paragraph, 3-4 sentences at most. So that's the basic structure of the discussion. Questions about that structure? Anyone have any specific questions or would benefit from us trying to work an example? The draft is due Friday, correct. And then I bet you can imagine what we're doing over the weekend. Peer reviews. Really, we do them during class on Friday, but I figure a peer review takes about an hour or about half an hour. You do 2 of them, Right, there's your hour of class, but I give you the whole weekend to do them, so you don't have to do it from 10:30 to 11:30 if there is a better time in your schedule. So that's pretty much it. We will, on Wednesday, we will introduce the abstract. We will also kind of just use that time for additional sorts of cleanup. Then the next week is poster presentation sort of stuff. And then it's just all of the review, right? Going back, making changes from your peer comments, my comments, everything, so that way we can turn in our paper and poster December 4th or whenever. What else can I do for you guys? Yep. December 4th-ish. Okay. Yeah. Basically, I will accept it right up to the point that I have to turn in grades. Yeah, because these wahoos wiggled out of the other two on Wednesday. You were supposed to have another reflection paper and you were supposed to present, but yeah. Yep. So you've got, I mean, you've got a few more drafts that will be due and a few more peer reviews. You know, like I think you have drafts of your poster still. You have like draft of your abstract and discussion and peer reviews for those sorts of things. But yeah, we're down to the wire here. You know, discussion, title, abstract, poster. And same thing, you know, you're more than welcome to turn these in early. I will, you know, grade them, give you feedback. If you would like to resubmit them, great. Like after that, that's fine as well. The goal in this class has always been to get a very good final paper, not to grade you during the process. Right, so as long as we get an awesome final paper in time for me to turn in my grades to the registrar, everything's great. So if you want to submit it early and get more feedback, or, I mean, what's the difference between that and having asked me to review stuff earlier in the process? Just keep in mind, there are multiples of you. And so, like, I can only review so many papers at so much time. So the earlier you get me stuff, the faster I can flip it back to you. What else can I do for you guys?